Welcome to the Femsplainers. I'm Danielle Crittenden.
And I'm Christina Hoff-Summers.
We have a fun show today. It's a little generational. Finally, I'm going to be joined in the studio with a fellow Gen Xer.
Slackers.
Meghan Daum.
I like your generation. I like you. You didn't present problems.
I'm just surprised because last week we talked about ageism and is it a problem? And we polled our listeners and we did not talk about the OK Boomer phenomenon, which I thought was very funny, which is a conservative. I had never heard of OK Boomer. It's apparently been around for a bit, but
they said that to Barack Obama because he questioned cancel culture. OK Boomer.
I just remember. Thanks, Obama. But a conservative radio host compared Boomer to the N-word. He tweeted, this was a man named Bob Lonsberry. He tweeted that Boomer is the N-word of ageism. And then got a lot of pushback, including, I think, my favorite tweet, which was baby boomer definition. Creates a world of vastly inordinate wealth disparity, designs climate change, refuses to address gun violence beyond thoughts and prayers, insists that young people are participation award snowflakes who need safe spaces. Young people reply, okay, boomer. And then the boomer has a meltdown and compares it to the N-word, which she can't even say.
I think it's more like the Holocaust. Calling us.
Are you offended? Called a boomer?
Yeah, I think it's genocidal.
Is it just because you're a self-loathing boomer? You're ashamed of your generation, what it's done and continues to do?
No, I think I like my generation. I mean, I'm not bragging, but like Rolling Stones, Bob Dylan, the Beatles, the Kinks. Okay.
Yeah, well, we had to rescue ourselves from disco by bringing in I think boomers.
I thought disco was your generation. It was
no,
crusty.
We brought in Sex Pistols and
that's good. But I mean the major. And I used to ask my students, I said, I'm not doing this judgmentally. Just tell me what to listen to that is the equivalent of Bob Dylan and the Stones. And they would say, well, listen to REM or listen. It was fine.
I would never say listen to REM, just.
I said, it's pretty good. Anyway, moving on.
Well, you also talked about this blind, I do keep wanting to say blonde ambitions, blind audition study. And we talked about that last week. And then you got didn't you get dissed by Bloomberg or something for this?
Not dissed because they didn't even mention me, but some science reporter apparently felt the need to defend the study. She had no evidence, no facts. She interviewed the authors. She interviewed the critics. She never called me. But the title of the Bloomberg article is, Don't Go Lumping in... No. The title of the article is, Can Blind Auditions Help Women Succeed? Yes. Well, no. I mean, maybe. We don't know. This just
happened to come out without mentioning you?
It links to my... She links to my Wall Street Journal article, but... Her name is Faye Flam. I'm not personalizing it, but she is a science reporter, and I don't think she understands science. And at one point, the most astonishing sentence appears. She says, well, it's become good sport to shoot down social science claims, as if it's a sport to show, that there's serious problems. And she said, even if the data in this study are too noisy, just too fragile, too meaningless, to determine that blind auditions increased female hires. That doesn't prove there's no effect. That doesn't prove discrimination didn't exist. Nobody said it proved anything. The problem is the study had no content. It just didn't move the needle in any way. And as Jesse Signal, as others have said, that's a big deal because this study is iconic. And yet for 20 years, no one noticed the problems. So finally, not just me, I wrote in the Wall Street Journal, I made a video showing its weaknesses and citing the work of data scientists.
Just went sport shooting as you do with people's studies that
With
are
their
precious
studies.
and adorable and they love, and you go shoot them.
But you would
shoot
think as
them
a
down in
science writer,
cold statistics.
she would have. And the thing is, the way that this Bloomberg article, the headline, the whole way it's framed, to the casual reader, it'll look like, well, if you heard there was a problem with this study, don't worry about it. Everything's fine. No, it's not fine.
Are you starting to go on a rant against fake news?
I'm getting not fake news, like shoddy social
this is
science.
fake news.
But this
Bloomberg
is
is-
shoddy. This does undermine the credibility. And you know what? I can't believe she's a science writer and would say the things that she says. And it's just very disappointing.
Well, let's not give her any more time. Okay, so let's move on from fake news, and maybe you have some good news, some real news in your little pile that you chose for this week.
I have probably the best medical news ever.
Okay.
Moderate alcohol drinking is associated with improved cognitive performance, reduced risk of dementia in old age. The latter is attested to by 3 meta-analyses, and this is quoting from the International Review of Neurobiology.
Come on, you're making this up just to make me feel bad that I've been not drinking for like 7 weeks.
And thereby neglecting your brain. You've been courting dementia and Alzheimer's. Not over drinking, just I don't
How much?
moderate
Okay,
alcohol.
what is moderate? Oh, I've got the study. Okay, clarifying the neurobehavioral sequelae
Sequela of moderate drinking
lifestyles and acute alcohol effects with aging. Okay, so how much is healthy? How much should I be drinking? I can get off this sober train. What should I be doing?
You know what I think? There was a great article a few years back by the philosopher Roger Scruton called In Vino Veritas.
Yes,
And
I like it already.
He suggested that we follow the Aristotelian principle of the golden mean. Not too much, not too little. He thought that too little wine was abstemious and self-denying. Too much, like binge drinking, he thought was actually a sin because it did the opposite of what alcohol could do. But he said the right amount of alcohol in the proper dose is a little intoxicating. And we use the word intoxicating like a poem can be intoxicating or beauty can be intoxicating. So he wants it to be like that, not like that you become an idiot. And he thought it should be communal, so you don't do it alone.
Oh,
I don't know if drinking with your dog counts.
I
but
think that's communal.
that's communal. And he just has this beautiful disquisition on the Aristotelian golden mean, and we shouldn't be puritanical about it because they wanted to deny pleasure. And he points out the role that reasonable amounts of alcohol have played in religious traditions, and particularly in Christianity, in Judaism. It's
Okay, so
way
so you're just paving the way for Bender November for Danielle. Well, I did say I would go to Thanksgiving, and then I think at Thanksgiving I'm going to pour myself a beautiful, large, moderate glass of red wine.
And I think that if you can, do not drink to excess, which you never did, in my opinion. But don't do it. But we have not. Maybe our listeners can help us determine.
Yeah, what is moderate, people?
What do you have an idea what moderate drinking?
Ella, I'm sorry, Ella, I didn't introduce you, but you need no introduction. Ella, of course, is here in the studio.
It's 2 glasses of wine.
I say less than 3 glasses of wine a night is moderate.
Whoa, that's
I
too
like
much?
that. No, because that
that's
works.
a lot.
That's not a lot.
I thought you were going to say
Maybe not.
3 glasses of wine a week.
Oh,
Maybe
come on.
Not like 7 days in a row having 3 glasses of wine. Maybe.
Well, that's
But,
what
like,
I would have. I was just about to leap on that.
I'd say like
train.
1 to 3. Maybe you have a couple nights off.
Okay.
A couple nights where you have 3. It's like my curfew when I was growing up. I negotiated with my dad, and it was like one night I got to stay out till 1. 2 nights I got to stay out till midnight. One night, the other nights I'd stay out till 11, and then one night I had to stay home.
What if I just stay home?
Right,
I'll
it's
stay
drinking
home.
Schedule.
I'll stay home, early curfew, and have all the drinks I want.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound moderate. Well, I'm very heartened by this, and I will look forward to Thanksgiving and the improvement of my brain.
Binge
So it has
drinking,
really, I guess, declined over 7
binge drinking
weeks.
is out, and drunken. He doesn't think you should get drunk. This is Roger Scruton, but pleasantly intoxicated.
Okay, well, backed up by neuroscience. Okay, I have to issue a male warning. Don't worry, this isn't
Oh,
about.
God.
It's not about
Not again.
amputated.
Decapitation.
No, it's not about that. This is about vaginas. And I know some men are going to get uncomfortable, so I just want to put that warning out there. But I'm reacting to a story in the Washington Post, which talks about a bill that is, quote, currently winding through the Pennsylvania legislature that would require the remains of miscarriages or abortions occurring in healthcare facilities, anything past the point of fertilization, the bill clarifies, to be buried or cremated. So the writer, Monica Hess, goes on to say, how is this going to be enforced? Do lawmakers plan to come stand over the toilets of miscarrying women with an eyedropper? Do we need thumbtack-sized coffins? She's obviously very upset about this. This is, I agree.
How
it's
likely?
bizarre.
How likely is this bill to pass? That's the thing. There are a lot of crazy bills. This sounds.
Well,
This
it was
will not pass.
approved by the State House Health Committee. So I don't know. But her point, aside from her outrage at this, was that, as usual in her phrase, this is a bill being passed largely by men who do not understand, let's just say it, vaginas. And
Do they understand
the female reproductive system.
the adrenal gland? Do they understand?
No, but if you're
fallopian-
going to pass something on,
Oh, yeah, I
past
get it,
the
I get
point
it.
of fertilization.
That does sound as though they may be physiologically illiterate.
Like, I mean, really. I mean, sometimes,
A miscarriage is,
not even
never. We won't even say.
perceptible. But anyway, she cites, and I have weighed asking this famous gynecologist to come on. I think she'd be really interesting, but I worry about how you will react. And also about a vagina-centric show, got to be honest.
Yeah, I just don't like the word. And it's not just the word vagina. Almost all the words, body parts, I don't know who named them. Elbow. Who made this word? And
Does elbow make you uncomfortable?
it's just unpoetic. Vagina.
Vagina.
It's hideous.
All right. Well,
And
this adrenal gland.
Unpleasant.
Well, this doctor, her name is Dr. Jen Gunter. She's known as Dr.
Gallbladder. We can do
Want some-
better. I want poetry.
You want some? Well, if you maybe talked about them in the Latin,
I don't know
which
where
doctors do.
Well, let's go back to the Latin,
What
or
is-
maybe this. I don't know where these words come from. Elbow and gallbladder.
Okay, before we go on more body part names you don't like.
Urethra.
Uterus. Let me go back to Jen
Uterus.
Gunter. Okay.
Uterus.
Jen Gunter
Okay.
is a gynecologist, and she has written a book. And her reaction to this Pennsylvania legislature was to mail 535 copies of it. It's called the Vagina Bible to every member of the U.S. Congress so they can educate themselves about this all-important part. The book is really more about explaining how the female reproductive system works because she feels there is a lot of ignorance, largely among male doctors in the health science world.
What state is this again?
Well, this is in Pennsylvania, but she's sending it to all of Congress.
Oh.
And she thinks that really society in general needs to be educated on this part.
You see, this is what I don't get. I can agree that there should be more understanding about the human body, but why just the vagina all the time? Why not the heart? Why not the brain?
Well, it's because
And maybe the elbow.
well, as she would say, She says, this is a quote from her. Right now, the burden of menstruation is put on half the population.
The burden?
But the laws, yeah, it is a burden, affecting menstruation are often written by the other half of the population. And she says, I prefer to think about menstruation as a natural resource because every person on the planet owes their life to it. I think that's fair. And she said, if male lawmakers had a better understanding of reproduction, they would regulate the pink tax. Have you done any of your
Actual feminist?
hunter shooting, your sport shooting on the pink tax? This is where women's hygiene products are priced 13% higher than men's, and tampons are taxed as if they're luxury goods.
Products?
Oh, it's
Jock straps?
Deodorant, maybe Jock itch powder.
Jock itch powder. Let's compare the pricing.
Aftershave, shaving cream. Well, aftershave would be a luxury product, so we have to see if...
But we might want more decorative packaging.
Well, there's something called the Pink Tax Repeal Act being sponsored by a Democrat representative, Jackie Spire. So do you think we should have her on to talk about this? Do
I have to commit now? Can I review just to see how high my blood pressure will go? I mean, I you know that I get along with everybody.
Yes.
So I'm sure if she came, it'll be fine. Except I don't know about this pink tax. Is she behind that?
Yeah. Big advocate of it.
Well, I don't.
But she does. But Dr. Gunter does take issue with a lot of the crazy things they publish on Goop. In fact, Goop hates her because she does things like says it's not good to put a China
egg into your
vagina.
But does she also question like fake statistics that say, medical procedures and pharmaceutical have only been tested on men and all of that? I bet she might go in for that. But maybe we could have. I'm fine. We could have an intelligent discussion.
Okay, I will look into that. And now, just before we get to our guest...
But I don't want a vagina Bible. But I would like a Bible about the rotator cuff.
Our vagina, who art in our bodies.
And if we could just change the word.
Okay, well, I can't do that.
We'll find the Latin. Maybe that is the Latin.
Before we go to our guest, we were talking last week about getting ready for the onslaught of holiday nonsense. And Ella, you pulled out some holiday movies that will start hitting the theaters that we can now, or our screens that we can now look forward to.
New ones?
Yes.
Not Miracle on 34th Street?
No. This is
Boomer.
This is my
Boomer. That's like
the
greatest generation. That's
okay, silent generation. Go back to being silent.
No, these movies are not classics. They're the cheesiest
Christmas exploitation movies.
Yes, one could say that. They're amazing. So far this season, I've watched Christmas Inheritance, Holiday in the Wild, and Christmas Wedding Planner. Netflix mostly, but
Christmas
Hallmark.
Wedding Planner?
Yeah.
You watch the Hallmark,
Lifetime, Netflix.
Did you do this for fun or personal degradation?
I don't know. I just kind of want something like happy on. They're happy.
So what are they like? Okay, so tell us. Tell us what's been. And so they're not like weird. Baby, it's cold outside is a rape anthem. They're not like this.
No,
they're not PC at all.
They're super cheesy love stories. It always works out in the end. There's no tension. And usually terribly acted. But that might change because there's some good ones coming up.
Really?
Some pretty famous people are actually getting behind this Christmas bandwagon. So, for example, Kristen Chenoweth is going to be in A Christmas Love Story on Hallmark. Amelia Clarke of Game of Thrones and Emma Thompson are going to be in Last Christmas, which is going to be in theaters.
Last Christmas? Is that a war on Christmas?
I don't think so.
The Last Christmas.
No, that's Amelia Clarke is a disillusioned department store elf with an angelic voice who meets a too good to be true man in London.
Oh, I don't like elf-themed movies.
Oh, no, that sounds good.
And there's The Night Before Christmas with Vanessa Hudgens, where a medieval knight travels into the future and Vanessa Hudgens falls in love with him. Bill Hader and Anna Kendrick are going to be in Noelle. And There's two.
Ella's just, by the way, so excited.
I think my two
movies.
favorites are last. Ashley Tisdale, who doesn't excite me, but Dennis Quaid, who does, is going to be in Merry Happy Whatever, which is 8 episodes on Netflix. It's a series. It's a Christmas series. And the last, but certainly not least, is going to be Christmas at Dollywood.
Christmas at Dollywood.
Yes.
Okay,
And Dolly will be in the movie.
I think we need to do a little bit of a binge.
I wish that we could have Dolly on the show.
Oh, that would be amazing.
love that.
Kristen Chenoweth, by the way, just came out with a really wonderful, I think it was Playing It For You, album called, I think it's This One for the Girls, where she's gotten, not just her, she turns out to have a beautiful voice.
What do you mean,
She
turns out?
has a voice like an angel.
She's the best singer ever.
Yeah, and she's so she does Ariel Grande, a version of You Don't Own Me, which is smokin', and she does one with Dolly Parton, which is amazing. Anyway, it's a great album. I highly recommend it. But let us bring on our guest. So very excited about our guest today, Meghan Daum. She's written a book called The Problem with Everything, My Journey Through the New Culture Wars. She has been a columnist for the LA Times. She's the winner of a 2015 Penn Center USA Award for Creative Nonfiction. She teaches writing at Columbia University, but she's just a really fun and interesting, I guess you describe her as sort of liberal, who's
No, a leftist who's just
grown disenchanted.
grown, confused. And she has the book, she's arguing with herself.
Yeah.
And I found it riveting. I just loved it. I listened to it on audiobooks. I just couldn't stop listening.
Yeah, no, it's very engaging. She is, as I mentioned at the beginning, a Gen Xer. So she's sort of between the wars on her politics of coming of age of, second wave feminism and now sort of dealing with millennial feminism and Gen Zer, as we have Ella in here. So it's going to be really interesting. And yet it was a fascinating book, and it had so many themes. So we'll bring her in, and then afterwards we're going to get to the My Fair Lady controversy, because we've had listener pushback on what we said last.
What we said?
Yeah. So we're going to
Just you white.
Just you white listeners. But let's bring on Meghan. Well, Christina, we've been talking about the onslaught of the holidays, and I'm not worried about what I'm going to get people, because I found the place where I'm going to get most of my gifts for you and even Izzy, which is the Grove Collaborative, which is an online marketplace that delivers natural cleaning, beauty, and personal care products directly to our doors.
Oh, my goodness. And they make healthy, affordable, effective products, easy and convenient. So I think by now there are about 500,000 American households that shop Grove for their healthy home essentials. And they carry safe products that are better for the planet and that really work.
Yes, and you'll find brands that you already know and love, and that we love, like Mrs. Meyer's, 7th generation.
Burt's Bees.
I love Burt's
Yes,
Bees.
I
The
like-
soap, the lip
balm.
moisturizer. Oh my God, it's like the best lip balm, especially in this cold weather. But we know you're busy like we are, and that's why Grove delivers what you need on your schedule. With flexible refill orders, you'll never have to worry about running out of your everyday essentials, and you'll also be saving the planet. There is more microplastic in the ocean than there are stars in the Milky Way. True statistic, Christina. You can't shoot that one down. So, if you want to start saving the planet and saving yourself time and everything else for a limited time, when listeners go to grove.co/femsplain, you will get a free 5-piece gift set from Mrs. Meyer's in festive holiday scents like peppermint or Iowa pine. Your tables will smell like the holidays.
So go to grove.co/femsplain. That is grove.co/femsplain.
Get this exclusive holiday offer, and I am definitely looking for dog breath mints for Izzy.
Her breath is fine. There are some problems.
Pine scented.
welcome to the Femsplainers.
Thank you.
Hi, Megan.
I'm so happy to be here. This is very exciting for
Well,
me.
we're happy to have you here. I feel I've been reading your book. I feel very identified with you. I've spent a lot of time recently with you. I feel it's good to have another Gen Xer in the studio to help fight OK Boomer over
Wait
here.
a minute here. Gen Xers.
2 against 1.
Slacker
Yeah,
generation.
no, I think we proved not to be the slacker
it's
generation.
actually, it's true. To the extent that there's anything of merit about generalizing about generations, that you were a good generation.
Yeah, we had to clean up your mess.
Yeah. Well,
We cleaned it up like a little bit.
A little
Yes.
bit. And now apparently, according to your book, we've a bigger mess. But before we get into the details, just give us an overview of your book. I mean, it is called The Problem with Everything, so that's a big assignment you've given yourself.
like it could be called Oy vey.
I had a lot of titles. There were a lot of potential titles. For a while, it was going to be called Woke Me When It's Over. That was my working title, my joke title with myself. And then a lot of people said, actually, that should be the title.
Yeah.
And I disagreed with that, although it would have been fun for that to be the title. But I don't
That's a
think
good
I don't
title.
think we're in the climate to quite pull that off.
Right. Well, give us a little bit of the overview. And you sort of write at the beginning that your motivation or the book you were going to write kind of changed
Yes.
with the election of Donald Trump. So just give us an intro.
Originally, the book was going to be almost entirely about feminism. I started thinking about it in 2016. It was going to be a sort of manifesto about the futility, or at least the counterproductive nature of some of the expressions of third and fourth wave feminism, especially on social media, the hashtag ban men, the I drink male tears coffee mug memes, that sort of thing.
To interrupt you, sorry, this was before Me Too, too.
This was way before. This was before everything. This was before Donald Trump was a glimmer in anybody's contact lens. This was well before. So this was 2016 early. And I had started noticing this sort of thing online, since early 2015. So I thought I was going to write this. It was going to be called You Are Not a Badass. So I was really tired of everybody being called a badass. Just if you could get out of bed in the morning and face down the patriarchy, that was enough to make you categorized as a total badass. So that was what it was going to be. It was going to be a sort of pretty discreet manifesto of sorts. And then the election happened. I had assumed all this time that Hillary Clinton would be the president and everyone would be able to tolerate a sort of ribbing, and that did not happen. And so I tried to do my project anyway, and then it really wasn't working out. And then in the meantime, the expressions of the culture war expressions just became so much broader, and intersectional doctrine became about so much more than women's issues. And so I really wanted to write about what was going on with the Trump resistance and the left and the generational divides within that more broadly. So it wasn't just about feminism, but about this whole gestalt. But it was very hard to write. It was like playing whack-a-mole. Like you're trying to write about something that's going on right now. And, I would spend weeks trying to take on some brouhaha that had erupted that felt very urgent. And then the next week I would think, well, I don't even remember that. Nobody cares. So it was really quite an
Nobody has
undertaking.
memory anyway. If
No.
one event, are we still investigating the Ukraine? Is there going to be impeachment?
That's yesterday's news. Yeah.
Now that one seems to be sticking a little bit. But that's interesting. How much do you think just the election of Trump is inflaming everything that we're seeing around us, especially, amongst women? I wonder if the Me Too movement would have had such holding
it wouldn't
power.
have happened, I think.
Well, no, you'd have Weinstein. I think Ronan Farrow still would have broken that story. But
are you sure? Because then you would have the Bill Clinton story. There wouldn't have been a mood among liberals to.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Because they had the Weinstein story for a long time.
But would it have become so broad and so
right.
so diluted and
and emblematic of
right of these times?
they're facing.
One of the things that's happened is that the Trump emergency has really given a lot of people a license to be sort of lazy in their thinking, I've noticed. Like there's a feeling like, well, we need all hands on deck. We don't have any room for nuance or complexity in the discussion because if we do that, the other side might hijack the discussion and use it for nefarious purposes. So we need everybody to stay exactly on message. We don't want anyone to question anything. We don't want there to be any debate within the left because that's going to be used by the other side. And that I find really, really troubling. And that's what animates a lot of the book. The book is about the women's movement to a large degree, but really mostly it's a call for nuance. And it's a book about what's happened to public discussion and thought itself.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's a tribute to nuance at a time where, nuance doesn't get clicks.
I want that to be
can't.
a hashtag or a bumper sticker, a call to nuance.
I tried to nuance, hashtag nuance. I have noticed also that the word has become weaponized. I've seen some people on Twitter say something like, oh, I'm posting this article, another nuanced take, as if it's dog whistle for alt-right adjacent or something like that. I mean, that's devastating to see.
It's happened to free speech. If you're talking about free speech,
right.
People are saying, oh, well, that's just a reason to...
Code for jerk.
Free speech is a right-wing talking point. Due process is a right-wing talking point, that sort of thing.
Well, go back to this. So let's just, for the moment, and this will be a very nice feeling moment, let's just pretend Trump didn't happen for a second. And you're going back and you're looking at the different generations. And as you lay out, there was second wave feminism, Betty Friedan, Gloria Steinem, 1970s. Then there was third wave, which is kind of what Christina and I were part of, sort of answering the 1970s feminism.
Oh, you think of yourselves as third wave? That's interesting.
I don't.
No.
She does.
Oh, okay.
Then I would like to know what it is. Third wave is so hard to describe.
I'm not going to let that one go.
Sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
That's true. But you were still young enough through that you weren't with. Okay.
I'm a boomer.
Okay, I know you're a boomer, but okay. Anyway,
okay.
But I think of myself as third wave.
Interesting.
Because I, sort of
right.
Gen Xer, growing up in the wake of all of that. You
guys were like pole dancing and stuff like that.
Well, taking a lot of success for granted.
Yes, that's true.
And then saying, "Hey, old ladies, you're harping on the wrong things. You were anti-marriage or anti-motherhood,
right?
And you got to chill out a bit and let's sort of regroup." Then there's what we have now, which is millennial. Erupting around us with Me Too, I think has become its identifier. And then you have some very interesting thoughts and on those generational divides. And what you are feeling now is that third waver coming up against what is happening now.
Well, that's very interesting because I grew up right alongside second wave feminism. So I was born in 1970. I was 3 years old in 1973 when Roe v. Wade was passed, when abortion became legal. I remember sitting there in 1982 in the kitchen with my mother, listening to NPR and hearing that the Equal Rights Amendment was not going to be ratified. And she and I talking about Phyllis Schlafly and who that was and how anybody could oppose the ERA. And my mother was very much a second wave feminist. So I, growing up, assumed that's what feminism was. And more importantly, as I talk about in the book, I never thought of myself as a girl as being anything but equal to boys. If anything, the girls were doing better than the boys, like Christina has written about. The boys, even by the 1980s, were falling behind.
Yeah.
And so, girls were doing better in school. There was just a greater spectrum of expression. You had more choices on how to dress, on how to be in the world. It just felt like a much better deal to be a girl. By the time I got to college, there were more women in college than men. Got a little older. Women were like buying their own real estate and having babies on their own. And it just seemed like we were doing so much better overall than men. And fast forward a decade or so, in about 2015, all of a sudden the default premise of the conversation around women was that we were this monolithic underclass and that we were losing somehow. And I found that very alienating. And what really drove the book is my quest to figure out why I didn't relate to that. So I could have, and I certainly did many versions and wrote many pages where I was just sort of hammering away at the grievance mongering and the sort of victim mentality and all that sort of thing. And I think that's worth talking about. But what I wanted to do that was different was do a self-interrogation and try to figure out why I was missing some of this stuff and where that was coming from. And I really started to think a lot about the conditions that I, as a Gen Xer, grew up with versus some of the conditions that millennials and Gen Zers have to contend with. And we got quite different, we were dealt different hands, I think, in a lot of ways.
What were those hands? Like, what do you see?
Well, for one thing, when you were a kid in the 1970s, there was something very androgynous about the whole ethos, right? Like, it wasn't sort of girls and boys as much as just kids. You didn't have the pink toy aisle and the blue toy aisle. Like, everyone watched the Bad News Bears. It was cool to be a tomboy if you were a girl. It was being a girly girl was like not cool. I mean, obviously there was this whole realm of like Charlie's Angels and Dallas Cowboy Cheerleaders. I'm not saying that women were not sexualized.
They considered themselves feminine.
Well, that's true. They had guns. They were yes,
were like
that's true.
Super cool. They were the Amal Clooney's of their time.
Okay, true enough. So, but I want to make clear, I'm not trying to say that like every woman was this, overall wearing free to be you and me listening androgynous person, but that was a very dominant aesthetic of that time. And I think that it was really a great gift to girls in a lot of ways. And on top of that,
and those girl bands, and
in the 90s, that came out of that. Exactly. That came right out of that.
Just seemed like girls with a lot of swagger and confidence.
Yeah.
And take on the world. And then suddenly we get this, what I've called fainting couch feminism, like a whole generation, damsels in distress in the presence of male vulgarity. Women are fainting and swooning, and like, where the hell did that come from? I have my ideas, but what do you think?
What I want to know is what they're getting out of it, where it came from. I mean, I agree with a lot of your theories on that. I have to say, I think the ubiquity of online pornography really shaped their sex lives and their approach to sexual encounters in a way that we didn't have to deal with. I think probably boys and men are more aggressive or expect different things, or there's a different sort of dynamic in a sexual negotiation that, for whatever reason, we didn't have to contend with. This is just a theory. I'm not out there dating 25-year-olds, but from what I hear from young people, I think it's important that like people my age really think hard about what they're up against that we weren't. It's very easy for us to say like, oh, just hit him over the head with your shoe and run out the door. I would certainly say that, but there may be ways in which there's sort of a climate around sexuality that for whatever reason feels threatening to them that didn't for us. I'm trying to give them the benefit of the doubt here, as you say.
We have Ella here, who's a Gen Zer, but and I want to hear Ella's thought on that because, I mean, it's easy to say, as our parents and our grandparents said, oh, suck it up. We walked to, school barefoot in the snow and we were tough. But I think Gen Zers and millennials have been dealt certainly a different hand, but in many ways a tough hand, because I think we still, when we were growing up in the 80s and 70s, there were still concepts or frameworks of courtship and expectations, even if the sort of feminists were saying, men are as
and even if we thought that there weren't, I mean, compared to the 50s, it felt chaotic, but right,
but
it feels organized
still
now.
Kind of norms about and expectations, but now it seems like just mass confusion. I mean, Ella, what would you say about the hand? Speaking on behalf of the entire generation,
no pressure.
that you were dealt. No, Ella's used to doing this.
I think there is mass confusion, and I think a lot of it stems from the lack of courtship. And when I hear my female friends complaining about something a guy did on a date or after a date or even just like a one-night stand or anything like that, it's often the problem they're describing is a lack of gentlemanly behavior. But I think there's a subtle idea that if you say someone's not a gentleman, you're expecting too much or you're being a prima donna. And so
or a hypocrite, right?
Or a hypocrite. And what do you want out of it? Like if you both had sex and you both got something out of it, so what more do you expect? But I think so. When people say, "Oh, I didn't like this thing he did," they use the language of like it was like an assault.
Oh,
But
that's interesting.
they're not actually describing an assault. You could just replace it with they weren't a gentleman.
We've lost
Or
our
they
vocabulary.
weren't into it. They didn't want to do it. It was icky.
Yeah, or it was icky, or they were into it until he didn't treat like he was a gentleman up to a certain point, and then he stopped being a gentleman right when it was going to get serious. Is often what I hear, and that the women they don't want to admit. I think that they actually liked him, and that they couldn't get him to commit, and so they just are like. Well, he was just a jerk. But oftentimes we'll continue to engage in sexual behavior with them despite not liking them.
This is like an age-old problem,
Yeah, that doesn't
right?
sound new to
But
me.
no, but it is. But there's no. I guess in the age-old problem, men would have to acknowledge that they were cads, or they could be cast out or censored in some way. Women have perpetually chased after wrong men and
Bad boys.
the bad boy, even just.
Or gotten blown off by them,
Or gotten
right?
blown off.
Rejected.
But you're right because Meghan, you say in your book you have when did and this was sort of in the onset or in the wake of the immediate onset of Me Too. You said when did infractions like weird lunches become lumped in with crimes like rape? So it's what Ella's sort of saying is that what was familiar to generations of women, to us certainly. Oh, I feel bad about that, or oh, that guy's a creep, is suddenly much more politicized.
It's framed as an assault, or it's framed as harm, really.
As harm.
Right?
Like he knew what he should have known that this was going to be emotionally painful for me.
And does that come out of like the coddling theory? Like, is it the parents' fault? We're going to make you the guest.
Personally, my
what you're saying.
theory is that there's a lack of romance, and people miss that, and it's like it's a feeling like you're missing out on a real committed relationship, but not wanting to admit that because you want a career and you're in school.
You're being basic if you admit that.
Yeah, and
Yes.
you don't want to be the person who says, well, I want a boyfriend.
Right. You don't want to be needy. Well, that sounds familiar. I remember feeling that way as a young person. You don't want to show vulnerability or be the needy girl. Right.
Right. But so talk about then you are coming up against this, your generation, and you're getting pushback. You're suddenly, you wrote about suddenly feeling old. Meghan, you suddenly felt like, the Betty Friedan to us, you are now feeling like to the millennials. And you wrote a little poignantly about
Well, I think Generation X is in a kind of funny position because the world has changed so rapidly in the last 20 years that we're not even 50 and yet we're sort of obsolete in a way. I had my first job out of college. I had a Selectric typewriter at my desk. Like we had a fax machine.
That was high tech.
Very big deal. It was. The fax machine
had a correct feature. You could
not only
write
that,
it.
but it was just smooth.
And
I
it
think it had
was
the little
smooth.
ball
Right.
rather than the.
I'd like to get one.
I know it's sort
explain
of like
what
a
it is.
steampunk thing now to have one. But so we didn't have internet. We had inter-office email, I suppose. But that wasn't that long ago. And so, we have people like me who were not digital natives, and yet here we are 20, 30 years later, and I have students and they'll say to me, well, what should I do? How do I get where you are? What did you do? Tell me what to do. And I could tell them what I did. And frankly, it has nothing to do with anything that they could do or would want to do. The world has changed so profoundly. And I think there's almost like a lack of mentorship. I have many students and I love trying to help them, but there are so many ways in which talking to me is like talking to a history book or something. It might be interesting, but it's not applicable. So it's a strange kind of feeling. Like I definitely feel like we're not living in the same world in any way that we lived in as adults. We were actually adults in this previous era, and that's the difference.
I want to question one thing in your book, and I'm sure you can clarify this, but you make the point that, and one of the many things I love about the book is you're constantly sort of arguing with yourself.
Yes.
And maybe so many young women see this differently. They will look at they will take the Aziz Ansari case and see that as sexual assault, and then Gen Xers and certainly boomers will just say it was nothing. It was a bad date, and it, as Caitlin Flanagan said, it was revenge porn for her to write about it and expose him in that way. But you go back and forth. Maybe there's maybe this is generational. Maybe this is I'm getting old, and we do notice that often it is older generation of feminists that are sort of scolding the younger women for being too hypersensitive. Maybe we're just being resistant to change. Maybe this is what change looks like. Now, I have thought about that argument, and it could be true, except I have watched over the years that these ideas, these sort of extreme ideas about the patriarchal oppressive system, were spoon-fed to kids by parents, often by mothers, feminist mothers, and then reinforced by teachers in college. And it's more and more extreme, and they rarely hear another point of view. So to me, I resist the idea that it's just youth rebellion. I mean, if you look at the 60s, yeah, there was a youth rebellion. It came from rock and roll. It came from outliers, poets, beatniks. Now it's coming from like junior assistant deans.
Yeah.
And, just this indoctrination, these fake statistics, this victim politics. It's coming from the insiders, the establishment. So it's sort of different.
Yes, I agree. I wouldn't call it just youthful rebellion, their attitude around consent, that sort of thing. But it is certainly being informed by all of these frameworks, right? I mean, intersectionality, which is something that in and of itself is quite useful. I mean, it's a legal theory. It came about in the context of a sexual harassment lawsuit at General Motors. Okay, and it's now just been elasticized into meaninglessness. With the Aziz Ansari case, what bothered me most about that is that it's the sort of thing that should never be aired in a public forum. I mean, that's the kind, again, and this is the sort of thing, I think this is to your point and to your question, that's the sort of thing that in our time, if that happened to somebody, you would go out to brunch with your girlfriends, or you would call your friend on the phone and say, oh my God, you would not believe this thing that just happened to me. I feel terrible. I hate this guy. Let me process this. And they would process it endlessly. We would go on. And that would probably be the end of it. The processing that used to take place in person and in private now takes place online for everybody to see. And that, to me, is what is so jarring. I mean,
it's jarring, but it's also so cruel. He was
it's
publicly
wrong.
humiliated.
Yeah.
And the lack of care.
Right.
I mean, I can see if someone's a predator, a violent predator, we don't want to show mercy, but someone's just human and clumsy, and then you subject them to that kind of humiliation. I see so much inhumanity in this.
Yeah, well, and it also happened because he had established himself as a woke figure, right? He was on the red carpet with the Time's Up pin, and she even said in her accusation that it really, she sort of sat on this for a while, but then when she saw him out there, being a sensitive man about Me Too, she just couldn't hold it in any longer. So, you make your bed.
Well, you also had this, I mean, again, as you say, Christina, that sort of self-critical back or self-questioning back and forth in your book, which I enjoyed because I think we all do that. But going back to some of the incidents when you were a young woman and noticing that there were younger women around you going, oh my God, like the Aziz Ansari, that wasn't just a bad date. That was, this whole big thing of male patriarchal oppression. And you looking back, and one of the things you found, which I'd love to talk about, is your own, I don't want to call it toxicity, but things women do to men.
Yes.
And that you took responsibility for at the time and would in retrospect, but now as this woman, and we see around us happening, women not taking responsibility for some
Right. Toxic femininity you're talking about. Yes, my list of things. I want people to raise their hand if they are going to admit that they did these things. Yeah.
I have
some of the list items? Okay.
I pulled some of them out. It said, raise your hand if you've ever behaved badly and blamed it on your period. Raise your hand. Okay, I disagree with this one, but I'll raise my hand. Okay. Raise your hand if you've ever acted helpless in the face of an unpleasant, if not physically demanding task like dealing with a wild animal that's gotten inside the house.
Oh, my God. Yes. That was my whole marriage.
Your husband was the
wild animal.
Raise your hand if you've ever manipulated a divorce or child custody dispute in your favor by falsely insinuating that a man has been abusive toward you or your child. And you also had this instance where you would go out for, speaking of weird or creepy lunches with this potential mentor middle-aged man.
Oh, yes. When I was in my 20s, yes.
I think I probably can figure out who that was.
No, you can't. Everyone wants to know.
But anyway, we don't need to know.
We need to know.
But that you were working the situation, knowing the power you had as a young woman over this. And I remember being that age and thinking how utterly hopeless and pathetic middle-aged men.
Oh, yes, and they probably weren't even that old. Like,
oh, I know.
They're 60, and they were probably like 41.
But you just felt this incredible power, and you used it, and
a little, yeah. To be clear, I mean, I did not do. This was not in anything I would ever classify as a Me Too situation. This was an interesting.
Well, that's the point,
case.
Right? You might now.
Right. Well, it was an interesting case because when I was in my 20s, there had been a man in a quasi potentially powerful position over me. I was always a freelance writer. Okay, so let me just be clear. This was not a workplace situation, but this was somebody in the same field, and it started off as sort of business lunches, and he was going to mentor me, and then it turned into dinners, and his personal life was in some chaos at the time. And it was one of these things where I felt like if I didn't go, I was betraying my own professional ambition somehow, like I needed to keep going. He never propositioned me directly. He did not do anything that crossed the line in any huge way. It was more like walking right up to the line and maybe stepping a tiny bit over it. But I never really felt threatened in that situation, because like we would be in a restaurant. He's not, holding me hostage there. I could have always left. And also, power shifts all the time. Power is fluid. Like a lot of the discussion these days there's a preoccupation with power in a hierarchical sense. Like, white men will have all the power, so this is why we need to tell them to shut up and listen for a while. And, these people over here don't have any power. It's often not the case. It's always going back and forth. So, and I noticed with this guy, I was so young that there was a way in which I had total power over him because I could have picked up the phone and made one call and made his life quite difficult. But the funny thing about this case, and I won't go on too much longer, but, all these years later, a couple years ago when Me Too happened, I noticed there was a Facebook discussion where people were describing somebody that sounded a lot like this guy and how they remember having these weird lunches in the same way, and how they were looking back on this and feeling sort of violated by it. And I was like, oh, that kind of sounds like that guy, but I didn't feel violated by it, so it can't be the same guy. It can't be the same guy. And I was really in denial about it for several days until I thought, well, actually, it probably is. And I asked the person who had originally posted it, and it turned out that it was. But I just found it really interesting that there was not a moment back then where I felt in danger or like somebody was doing me wrong. If anything, this was life in the big city, which is an idea I come back to a lot in the book. Like, this is just kind of like how it goes.
But that passage in your book reminded me of something written by Emma Duncan, who is an associate editor at The Economist. She wrote it about a little more than a year ago in the London Times. And in a similar vein, she was remembering that when she was 19, she had an internship, and there was some kind of famous journalist who took an interest in her, like an older guy, and he'd like to take her out to lunch and just take her along to meetings and tell his colleagues, kind of just have her around all the time. And she said that once in a while in a taxi, he'd sort of kiss her on the cheek, and she found it very creepy. And the whole thing. But then she said, but there was another factor at work, and now I'm quoting, which is not entirely to my credit. Going around with the beard gave me a kick. I was flattered by the attentions of a powerful man, however unattractive his bristles. Seen in his company, I was no longer just an unremarkable undergraduate, indistinguishable from the rest of the aspiring crowd. I was beginning to be somebody. It also gave me a competitive advantage. I got to meet people I otherwise wouldn't have met, and I probably hoped that if a job came along, which it didn't, he would have looked favorably upon my candidacy, as he did on my neck. But letting him inflict his bristles upon me, I was maybe gaining ground over others in the field. And she says, I'm not excusing this behavior, and this is the final line, but don't think, I'm not excusing this behavior, yet I don't think I'm entirely in the clear. It's certainly wrong to use power to get sex, but it's also, in my view, wrong to use sex to get power.
Oh, so well said.
Emma Duncan, economist. I mean, yeah.
This goes back to what I keep saying about nuance. We have to have nuance in these discussions. I love what she wrote there because she's absolutely embracing the complexity and the conflictedness. I think we have such a hard time sitting with our own conflictedness, and it results in these completely siloed threads of conversation. That's like, oh, you're either on the right side of history or on the wrong side of history, or this is either an assault or it was not. And that's not how the way the world works.
Well, I think there's also an interesting discussion to be held. I have it with my daughters a lot about young female sexual power. And this is, Ella, when you're talking about your sort of generation of young women's confusion, it's like, you guys are blind to the actual power you wield at this. And we're not allowed to talk about it in a frank way. But with my daughters, one who's 28, one who's about to be 18, I said, until you're 30, you have as much power in this world as Bill Gates. That the female youth is a powerful, powerful thing. And you just have to recognize that over this power you have over young men. And I know that that's a kind of sexist view, but it's true.
Well, it's biology. I always say Mother Nature is the ultimate misogynist.
Right.
Yeah, right.
So
She didn't read the second sex.
When young men are being shitty to them, they just have such a power to cut these.
Yep.
You have the power of youth, you have the power of beauty, and you can make these older men that make them, suicidal and feel.
Oh my gosh! Look at Bill Clinton. I mean, the risk that men will take for a one sexual act with a very young woman.
Yes.
But see, here's what interests me about this, because a lot of feminists today will say, well, that's an example of toxic masculinity. We live in a patriarchy. You just explained exactly why we need to fight against this. I don't disagree with that, but I don't think we can socially engineer it out of society. That's the difference. What I feel is missing in all of these conversations is an acceptance that this is coming out of evolution. I know it's not fashionable to talk about evolutionary biology and evolutionary psychology anymore, but we have to. We're not going to be able to make any sort of changes insofar as they need to be made if we don't recognize what's true and where
human
it's coming
nature.
from.
Human
Right.
nature should factor
And there's a
into it.
reproductive mandate. I mean, this is all about. Of course, older men are going to be attracted to younger women because there's a biological mandate to reproduce yourself. I don't like it any more than you do.
Younger women have
That's
been
right.
known to be attracted to powerful older men because they are.
Christina, sorry. No, I'm joking. Yes.
He was an intellectual. He wasn't.
Well, no, and I'm also not saying to my daughters, so be sexually manipulative. It's, it's like, be aware of this power. And I think that's the discussion that you raised, that we have our own potential to use our sexual power badly.
Right.
Or even behave badly as women.
Our female sexual
female
privilege.
And to think that we don't, frankly, is sexist.
It is.
Like
That's another part I
that's-
loved in
yes.
your book, is that it's because men and women are equally human.
Well, we're people. That's right.
So
If we're going to talk about toxic masculinity, which I think needs to stop in the culture, that term needs to go away. But as long as it's around, we need to talk about toxic femininity, because women do all sorts of horrible, horrible things. Like I said in this list, the list that you just read from.
That was just a few, by the way.
That was a few. And I'm not, just to be clear, I'm not suggesting that everybody falls into that category, but there's not a single, every item on that list, there's somebody I know or have come into contact with that could raise her.
Well, there are young women that want to include being coerced into sex when you don't want it under the rubric of rape. Young women insisted on that to me at Skidmore College and at this debate I had with Roxane Gay in Australia. The audience just was furious.
You are truly, I don't use this word loosely, you are trually a badass.
I was just going to say.
For showing up to that. Hats off to you.
Maybe the better word is clueless. Because
I thought badass is a fine line.
I thought we might become friends, you know? I don't know what I was thinking.
Naive.
No, but anyway,
Yes.
what was I just saying?
Toxic femininity. Coercing men.
Being coerced. Okay. So at Skidmore and then on the other, so coercion. However, if young ladies out there, if that's going to count as rape, then a lot of men have been raped because there is a lot of women have coerced men into sex. They whined and wanted.
And it can be powerful in this way. Men will feel if they don't go along with it, it's emasculating. They will look not masculine enough. Oh, she'll think I'm gay. She'll think I don't want to insult her. Do you know what I hear a lot from men? This woman, she wanted to be sexual with me. I didn't really want to, but if I rejected her, it would hurt her feelings.
Yes.
And it could lead to a whole bunch of stuff. So he did the gentlemanly thing and had sex with her in a certain way. I mean, this is so complicated.
But it's human. It's human.
That's right.
And the fact that people have just put it in this Procrustean bed, it has to be, and rape. It's all rape if it's unwanted or regretted.
Well,
sex.
and it's just, again, it is sexist. Like I talk in the book, this whole punching up versus punching down idea, right? Like, this comes from comedy. So you're not allowed to make fun of somebody unless they have more power than you, if they're famous or, wealthy or a politician or whatever. So we have taken men and assumed that they have so much power just unequivocally that we can punch up at them and we can make fun of them, that we can assume that they have power at all times. To do that is effectively to hand them power that they don't necessarily have.
Right. And you said I was just looking at that paragraph that I pulled talking about that. It says you lift them up in order to knock them down, but then you literally hand men their own power. It's like doing a jujitsu move against yourself.
Right.
There was another part of the book that I just found so interesting, and it was the section on moral panics. And part of the underlying issues that Millennial and Gen Xers are having is that this moral panic is arising from something. And what you talked about, often these moral panics come with the discomfort of social change, and especially with women. So just as women in the 80s, I'd totally forgotten this, you're completely right. Just as women were really starting to hit the workforce, thanks to second wave feminism.
When middle class white women were
white women, yes, thank you, yes. And creating this, although my mother had always worked too, but creating this generation of latchkey kids, blah blah blah. Suddenly there was this mass panic over child abduction,
right?
And satanic cults in daycare centers,
yeah,
right. And it was like this twofer that completely contrived, and you had again reminded me of the abduction of Eitan
Pace, Eitan Pace,
who was abducted from Greenwich Village. It was just like the worst type of stranger danger.
Terrible case, and such an outlier of a case,
right?
Just extreme.
And it turns out to be the rarest,
absolutely,
of all crime. It's almost always a parent and a bitter divorce,
right? And then we saw kids on milk cartons.
Right.
And that it was like a reaction just designed to cause women, especially working mothers, especially white working middle class mothers, this
and promoted
guilt.
By Feminist. And Ms. Magazine.
Ms. Magazine had it on the cover.
Yeah. And Gloria Steinem was part of a team that went to excavate the McMartin School. They were going to try to dig under the the
McMartin preschool case. There were several of those, but that one, I almost feel like the other day I was thinking about something like that feels a little McMartin-y. Like I feel like McMartin-y, that it should be an adjective. People went to prison. I think that's still the longest trial in criminal trial in history.
Explain briefly what the McMartin
So the
case
McMartin case, it was a preschool daycare in Southern California, and that was where there was a mother that had complained, who had said that her very small child, like a 3-year-old or something, said that there had been these like outrageous sexual acts going on in the
involving
classroom.
devils and witches on brooms.
And it got more and more, and then one kid would tell the other kid, and pretty soon you had these kids reporting things like there were elephants walking through the classroom, and these people who owned the preschool were charged, and the prosecutor...
And they brought in psychologists, experts in recovered memory.
Yes, and the
would
recovered
show
memory
them
thing was going on at that time.
Anatomically correct dolls.
Right.
Did they touch you here? Did they touch you?
Right.
And coaching children. I mean, and the children start to believe it. The 3-year-olds can make up anything.
But that sort of also explains, because as this, and I'm on the older end of Gen X from you. I think I'm 7 years older than you are. But we sort of think we grew up feral. I mean, we grew up, I grew up in the 70s, able to do anything. Our parents never knew where we were, et cetera, et cetera. And then you sort of look at these millennial and Gen Zers, all this alphabet.
Zillennials.
Okay, thank you. We look at the Zillennials, and you think they're the product of helicopter parents. Well, where did the helicopter parents come from? They're my age. And I realized, of course, it's come out of this whole... We had all these series like, there aren't as many mothers at home. And
is it because we're mad at our mothers for going to work? I wonder that.
I totally identified when you said, as a kid, you couldn't wait to grow up.
Right.
I love that. I felt adult supervision was insulting,
and tedious,
and
embarrassing,
condescending.
And you couldn't smoke. I just wanted to have a cigarette, and my mother would have a.
But maybe this is a product of that kind of mass hysteria that there was. So we're all, speaking as we're all paranoid about our kids. We produce these, completely coddled, protective,
fragile. This culture of fragility
But now we've got this new kind of moral panic going around, as you say, with
around safety of sex and safety of women,
and masculinity, just terror about any expression.
It's underlying that.
I sometimes wonder if things are so safe and women are actually doing so well that there's almost like this subconscious need to create a crisis when there isn't one.
But it was fed by Catherine McKinnon and Rhea Dworkin.
Yes.
No, but back then, that generation of young women, it was
in the early 90s, right? Correct?
80s and 90s, but the power of those teachings didn't diminish, even though Camille Paglia and I and Katie Roifi and others tried to refute it and kind of won the argument in the court of public opinion, we thought. But they won the assistant professorships. And they've been there.
Just remind, we've talked about this, but just remind what was the Andrea Dworkin position. This was the original hysteria.
Adamantly anti-pornography, sort of sex negative.
Sex-phobic.
Yes.
And basically, intercourse itself was patriarchal and oppressive.
Her book was called Intercourse.
And Catherine McKinnon.
Any relationship
Catherine
with a man was
McKinnon had
inherently...
statistics that, half of women have been raped, and it's 20% inducted or more into prostitution, and battered, beaten, despised, and I don't know where that was coming from. There was no data from any serious data gathering institution to support it, but she didn't feel the need because she listened to women's voices, and I just think there was enough young women, and then women's studies professors took this seriously and passed it along to a lot of sensitive, intelligent young women, and it did something to their brains. It appears to be that these ideas are so twisted that young women have not been able to liberate themselves from them, but now they graduate, they go on.
Well, they become articles of faith. The social contagion effect now happens on social media. It's Alyssa Milano, it's who was it? Charlize Theron. She was just, I don't know if she tweeted this or was something on social media. She's like, I have to explain. She has a son who's African American. I have to explain that there are cities that he's not welcome in, that I can't take him to. And, this gets 1 million likes. I'm paraphrasing, so don't quote me verbatim here. But it's like there is such social capital to be gained in this kind of hysteria. I hate to use that word, but that's what happens.
Right.
We have these assumptions and pre-approved messages, and then they get attached to slogans and statistics. So, the idea that women are in dire jeopardy on college campuses gets turned into 1 in 5, right? The gender wage gap being largely a function of discrimination gets turned into 79 cents on the dollar. And these things become assumptions. And then social media comes in and turns them into memes and vehicles of style.
And then anybody who challenges
Right.
gets punished and called a fascist or worse.
Right. There's no incentive to actually isolate what's true. There's a great incentive to just keep repeating it because you get a dopamine hit every time you get a like.
Right. But moral panics do need some sort of kindling to take off. And it's true that today we didn't have social media the way we had. But even in the 80s with the milk cartons were the social media of the time. So there is some, and I talked to my elder daughter, what Ella was saying. I mean, there is something deeply felt that is wrong and that this moral panic, as it were, this sexual panic among young women is a reaction to something. And it may be these professors and people are giving it some misdirected form, but there is something underlying it that's creating it now.
Is it the downfall of men? Are they frustrated that men aren't rising to the occasion of contemporary life?
There's a shortage of marriageable men because of the...
And there's hyper-assorted mating that comes out of this, right? I mean, I find that really interesting. I don't go into it too much in the book, but lately I've just become really interested in just the numbers, sort of the dating economy for young people. We thought it was bad when we were young, right? And I can't even imagine now.
What do you mean by just the...
Well, there are so many more women going to college than men, for instance. So if you then are in your 20s and you want to partner with somebody who also went to college, you're going to have a very small pool to choose from. So you've got all these really accomplished women competing for the top 2% of men, and you've got all these other men who can't get anywhere. And then these little sub-communities arise, incels, which I do not think are like a terrorist organization, to be clear, but there are a lot of men in that situation.
Who are very angry.
Who are very angry. And it may be that, and then they're perpetuating sort of misogynist memes online, which exist, and people are reacting to that. And I really just think it has, so much of this, that the patriarchy is actually failing. What we're seeing is the last gasps of a patriarchy, and it feels very, very destabilizing.
Yeah, and who want? And I don't know anyone except a small group who want to replace it with a matriarchy. Well, the idea,
can you imagine?
Was to
look at Katie Hill. I mean, it's talk about all things are equal.
Yeah, I want to replace it with an equality society. I mean,
or a meritocracy. How about that?
Yeah, a true meritocracy with equality of opportunity. We're not exactly there yet, but we are probably closer than any society in history.
And we're closer than we've ever been.
Yeah.
How about that?
Yeah. So build on that rather than let's tear it all down, and that seems to be the message of the social media feminism.
Before we end this, I just have one question. Now that we've all worked ourselves up into the problem with everything.
And I have nothing to drink. I didn't bring anything.
Yeah, you did. You had some... I saw
I know. I had one glass
of champagne.
Is there at least...
That is the problem with everything. There's never enough to drink.
These little holders hold nothing.
That's a substantial holder, Christina. I'm sorry. Okay. But here, have my mocktail. Have some of my Havana twist.
Okay. Can I finish it?
Yeah, you can finish it. Go for it. We're also we're in our little Upper West Side bubble, as it were, metaphorically. That how much of this really is a problem for the broader population? I mean, how many? This is the problem, as we always discuss with Twitter and things. You can just start to believe. I mean, there are a lot of people, men and women, suffering. There's been huge cultural changes in norms in marriage, et cetera, and having kids, but in the end, how many people are running around worried about this stuff and
Not
worried about...
not that many, but they have outsized influence is the problem. So on the campuses, the activists, the ones who are deplatforming speakers, pulling fire alarms, that sort of thing, it's a very small percentage.
But
as
very
you know.
vocal.
But very, very loud. And same thing on Twitter. There's a small group of people who are, stirring up trouble, calling people out, trying to cancel people, this sort of thing. The problem is that institutions, corporations, universities will cede authority to them. If Disney is going to fire a director because some people on Twitter dug up 10-year-old tweets of his and got mad about it, nobody's working for Disney. Everyone's working for Twitter. Disney is working for Twitter. And that's the problem. That's the problem.
Yeah. All right. Well, Meghan, thank you so much for coming
Thank
into
you.
the studio. We're so excited to meet you in person.
Likewise.
And there were so many things we didn't get to.
I know. I feel like
just
we could
loved
talk
your book, and
forever.
I thought, because I kept thinking, well, I have to write another book and update it. I feel like you've done it.
This book was so hard to write. Let me tell you, don't try to write a book about this. It's so complicated.
I'm not going to. And I loved
make
when
yourself
you said that you
crazy.
actually wrote 3 times.
Oh my
so much
gosh,
this book.
so much.
And that is so frustrating because
But
you
you've done a great
job.
Thank you.
I loved it. Found it
The
super
problem with everything.
The problem with everything, my journey through the new culture wars. Thank you, Meghan.
Thank you. I loved this. Thank you.
Oh, it was such a joy to have her in studio.
Yes, you've been. I've just became aware of Meghan, but you've been aware of her for a long time.
Well, I was always retweeting her LA Times columns. She just has an original take on things.
Right.
And she's a beautiful writer. She teaches writing. And one pleasure in reading her book is just she's a great stylist, a storyteller.
Didn't you say she had written a book about ogling at people's houses?
Yes. We have to read that book.
What, just about, I think it was something like how my secret, what was about like just how her life would be better living
If
in
only I owned that house.
If only I owned that house.
I have that gene.
Yeah. I'm total real estate porn myself.
Yeah, and even my mother and I, we would just walk around. When I was growing up in Santa Barbara and in Santa Monica and just look at beautiful houses and what we would do. We never quite approved of the way they were done up, and we'd have ideas. And she talks about that she would go to open houses just to look at the houses. I've done that.
David, we're in England recently and for the first time visited Windsor Castle, and he was laughing at me because I was disapproving of a lot of the decor of Windsor Castle.
It could be a bit dowdy.
It's sort of a bit dowdy and reminded me of Canadian provincial, parliament buildings. It was a little of a style and
not quite up to Downton Abbey.
No, Downton Abbey is beautiful. No, it was no Downton Abbey.
Yeah.
But all right, well, we don't have a lot of time. So Ella, we have some more listener reaction, and including the one which we'll get to last about the pushback, the defense of the politically correct version of My Fair Lady that we discussed last week. But what is...
People are attacking my defense
Yes.
of My Fair Lady.
Yes,
My blood
they
is
are.
boiling.
Yes,
but
they
move
are.
on. Let's hear the questions.
So before that, this listener feedback relates to what we talked about this episode. So this is from Mary Grace. She says, thinking about your latest episode, regrets, we've had a few. I was thinking about the people I knew who posted a hashtag #MeToo on social media. I knew a few people who posted about their sexual assault back in 2017, a few of which I was aware of, but the majority of posts I saw from people I knew were about frustrations with sexism and sexual harassment. I have several close friends who were actually raped, and their perpetrators still students at our university, and they were silent the whole time. In fact, I don't think this movement was empowering for them. If anything, they were trying to forget what happened so they could just move on with their lives. So 2 years after Me Too, I have come away believing 2 things. 1, the movement drew in lots of people who were not true victims, but empathized with them. In their quest to be a part of the movement, they took away from the legitimacy of what Alyssa Milano's original post was about. 2, the movement was not a helpful platform to share and speak out for the majority of women who were seriously violated. It solved almost no problems in terms of providing help to women who were actually harmed. The logistical problems of punishing men who've assaulted women still exist. It's no easier to prove. Women still don't know how to go about bringing about justice to someone who assaulted I've heard almost no education directed towards women telling them they need to go to the hospital, immediately get a rape kit, not change clothes, not shower, and document everything that happened. Anyways, thank you for your work on the podcast.
What a great letter.
Yeah, that's really true. I've never thought about that way. I mean, part of the great thing about Me Too was the sort of attacking what, or dealing with what Elizabeth Drew called the atmospheric discrimination, the sort of lechery on the job, a lot of those things. But she's absolutely right about
The actual serious problem of sexual predation and why the movement didn't have more of an impact on things that really could change things for women, like rape kits.
Well, I guess also if you're raped in the way that she describes, that, yeah, why are you going to really go post it on social media? Hey, I was walking down this dark alley and I'm really outraged that I got brutally assaulted. You know, it's
not helpful probably to do it that way.
no, but she's absolutely right about the education.
Yeah.
That's not this guy looking at me a wrong way should be fired.
And educating police departments, so you don't turn up at a police department with some clueless guy who's, you know, and it's an embarrassing. They should have, in major cities, I'm sure they do, but maybe more people who specialize in dealing with these
Right, but
cases. And you could stop these serial rapists. A lot of these could be stopped with just more intelligent protocol and every rape kit being tested and filed.
Right. But a lot of women don't even want to go to the police. Dr. Jen Gunter, calling Dr. Jen Gunter. We need her out there talking about this. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for that.
Excellent.
Excellent analysis. Okay, Ella, let's bring on My Fair Lady.
All right. So this is from Lana. It's titled My Fair Lady Rant. She says, I listen to you guys religiously and sometimes disagree with what you say, but not enough to write in. But today's discussion on My Fair Lady made my eyes pop. First off, the original story is that she leaves him. I thought this was understandable to any woman with a spine. Why would you stay with someone who treats you badly? So what if you can hold your own? Holding your own against abuse and disrespect should not be necessary. It certainly is a poor choice to walk into with eyes open. Shaw's Eliza is sensible and she walks away. Why did the musical change that? Well, obviously because for the longest time, America had only one dramatic arc available for female protagonists. To get married to whichever male was most readily available, whether he's worth marrying or not. This is basically the plot of Annie Get Your Gun as well, which teaches women to suppress their talents to avoid bruising the ego of whatever eligible bachelor is within 10 feet of them. Both these musicals are a crime against womanity. Eliza walking away is not really a Me Too paradigm shift. It's a post-Frozen shift. It took the brilliant minds at Pixar to realize that women can have meaningful relationships with each other and be better off without abusive men. I'm not going to say happy because I know you'll disagree, but can we agree that a woman is better off single than with someone who calls her names, puts her down, threatens her with physical abuse, and uses her? Respect is one of the most important ingredients to a healthy relationship. Henry Higgins does not respect Eliza. She respects herself and walks away. She'll find someone else. If you desperately need a wedding, there's always Shaw's sequel. Freddie might not be that sharp, but at least he's never tried to strangle someone shortly before proposing to them.
Okay. Where to begin?
It's a good one, Lana.
Where to begin? First of all, it wasn't the Americans who changed the ending. It was the British. Now, Shaw, in his original 1914 version, he left the ending sort of ambiguous. And the actors in the play couldn't stand it. They wanted love. The audiences couldn't stand it. And they secretly changed the ending and turned it into a love story. And then Shaw was put off and he wrote a sort of sequel to it that had her marry Freddie and then live a humdrum life. And that was because Shaw was, he was an anti-romantic. He was sort of a ponderous misanthrope. But the important thing is the musical then took what the audience had demanded to be a happy ending in England, not America. And they took this musical, which is My Fair Lady, and it's their production. And it's not what when they write these songs like "Why Can't a Woman Be More Like a Man," they're making fun of the misogyny of Henry Higgins. They're making fun of him and laughing at him. Now, you can put on the play, which apparently they're going to do to make him just look angry and vicious, but he was a misanthrope too. He just didn't like anybody, and he wasn't polite to anybody. He didn't treat anybody well, but he met his match in Liza Doolittle. And so this is, and Lerner, I guess it's Lerner's daughter. They're dead now, the people who created the musical, but the daughter considers this Me Too version to be a complete betrayal of the creative work of her father. Anyway, let me say this to the letter writer. I have decided that I'm going to go see it. I have tickets.
I'm not going.
She refused to go, but Sally Sautel, our next guest, is going to go with me. And it's possible that with my new consciousness, I'll see things I didn't see before. But I think this is presentism, sort of imposing some contemporary mores on what's a period piece. And just live and let live and let this play.
I'm gonna really annoy you. I'm gonna agree a little bit with Lana, because when I watched the movie version originally, because the stage version had Julie Andrews in it, correct? And then
Yes.
but with Rex Harrison, who just seems so old. I remember watching it, when I was much younger, and just thinking, yeah, I agree with everything she described about him, and he's old.
Wasn't he in his 40s?
Yeah, but he just seemed such the wrong age for her. So I sort of took issue with the fact of
You've just committed the equivalent of what do they say?
Ageism?
Yeah.
Okay, boomer.
Yeah.
No, I thought it was he was so magnificent in the role, don't get me wrong, but the pair of them just, I didn't like the pairing, so I sort of had that reaction. But, it goes back to Taming of the Shrew. I mean, this idea that a man has to be king in his house, and the only way to happiness is sort of the breaking of the powerful woman. It's an interesting...
But there are many interpretations of the Taming of the Shrew, and some think that that it was mutually agreed upon kind of performance.
Well, it does remind me of a Jewish joke. I know I've told you, but I really like this joke, where one Jewish man is telling another Jewish man about his marriage. And he says, I make all the important decisions in our marriage, and my wife makes all the unimportant, small decisions in our marriage. And the other man says, well, what are the important decisions? He goes, I decide what our China policy should be, whether we should be fighting this war or that war, what we think of the president's current economic views. What does she decide? She decides where we go on holiday, where we live, where our kids go to school,
I thought
what we eat. And there's sort of this, there has to be, in a way, this is just saying that women do wield so much power within these relationships. That way of...
Exactly. And I think that Eliza Doolittle, you watch, he changes her, obviously. She goes from being a flower girl to hailed as a princess. But he grows accustomed to her face. He falls in love. He was a man that was, a confirmed old bachelor and liked to remain so. And she won his heart.
But maybe you could argue, taking Lana's position, that he could only fall in love with something he had created, and he had taken her away from her true self and made her into something that was more pleasing.
Well, then we could say that about Cinderella. You could ruin, you can take any
that's my
love
favorite
story.
one. Don't wreck Cinderella for me. I want to go.
Sleeping Beauty.
Let's go watch some of those Hallmark movies with Ella. I like the sound of those. Anyway, I think that's all the time we have. So, please support us on Patreon. We got some more supporters last week. We're halfway to meeting our production costs. Halfway, people. It's halfway. $1 from each of you. If you like what you're hearing, please support us, patreon.com/femsplainers, and you get our secret episodes that we do every month and more benefits. So go check it out. And thank you.
Bye-bye.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Femsplainers. Keep up with us on Twitter and Facebook at Femsplainers and on Instagram at Femsplainers Podcast. Send questions and comments to contact@femsplainers.com.
A big thanks to Ella Ryder, our research and in-studio production assistant, and to Nat Frum, our audio and video editor. And we're proud to be part of the Ricochet Network and grateful to the American Enterprise Institute for allowing us to record in its studio every week in downtown Washington, D.C.
And miss something? You'll find everything you need at our homepage, femsplainers.com, including links to past episodes, where you can sign up to support us, and even to merch. And please don't forget to like us or give us 5 stars on iTunes.
Thank you. Cheers.
Cheers.